There's a secret method buried deep in the roots of old-school gardening. Something so simple that it quietly turns any bed into a self-fertilizing powerhouse. It doesn't need expensive equipment, it doesn't demand constant turning like compost piles, and it doesn't rely on chemical boosters that wash away after the first rain. During the years of wartime scarcity, homesteaders and soldiers' families perfected it because they had to. Fertilizer was rationed, manure was hard to get, and people needed to find a way for their soil to feed itself. Out of that necessity came what's now known among soil revivalists as the lazy root feeder, a buried system that lets nature handle the hard work while you reap the benefits year after year. Stay with me for this first minute, because once you understand how it works, you'll never look at compost or fertilizer the same way again. The lazy root feeder began as a wartime adaptation to fertilizer shortages. During World War II, victory gardens weren't just patriotic, they were survival. Every inch of soil had to produce food, and yet there was little to spare for upkeep. Fertilizers went to the front lines for producing rations, and animal manure was redirected to larger agricultural efforts. Families who had to grow their own vegetables learned to stretch every organic scrap they had, and that's where this system was born. They learned to feed plants from below, not from above. Instead of spreading compost or manure across the surface where rain could leach it away, they buried organic matter right where plant roots could access it. The buried matter slowly decomposed, releasing nutrients directly into the root zone. It didn't smell, didn't attract flies, and best of all, it fed the soil for months without any more effort. The lazy root feeder was simple, a buried feeding channel or tube filled periodically with organic material and sealed under the soil surface. Over time, it became a living nutrient pipeline, always active and always self-sustaining. You know, the secret really lies in feeding the soil from below rather than just from above. These days, modern gardeners often rely on surface feeding, spreading compost or maybe some liquid fertilizer right on top of the soil. While this might seem effective at first glance, the truth is, much of that nutrition just evaporates, oxidizes, or simply runs off before it ever reaches the roots. During the war, gardeners discovered something quite clever. By reversing the process, placing the nutrition underground, they could, well, eliminate that waste entirely. So, here's how it worked. Trenches, holes, or even buried tubes were filled with alternating layers of compostable materials. Things like vegetable peels, crushed eggshells, shredded paper, and just a bit of soil in between each layer. Once everything was sealed up and watered, microbial life got to work. The buried material began to break down, forming a natural compost reactor that, over time, released nutrients gradually. The roots above it didn't just absorb nutrients, they followed the decomposition downward, building stronger, deeper systems. The deeper the root growth, the more drought-resistant and productive the plants became. The lazy root feeder wasn't just feeding plants. It was training them to thrive independently. Over time, the soil surrounding the buried lines turned darker, richer, and more sponge-like. Even neglected beds stayed fertile, because the underground microbes never stopped working. Building a lazy root feeder today is easier than most modern fertilizers. Recreating this system doesn't require any special tools. To build your own lazy root feeder, start with a trench about 8 to 10 inches deep and as long as your bed. It doesn't need to be wide, just enough to hold a spade's width of material. If you prefer a contained version, you can use a simple PVC or bamboo tube with perforations drilled along its sides. The key is to allow air and moisture to pass through while keeping the compostable material below the surface. Once you have your channel, begin layering organic matter. Start with a handful of coarse material, sticks or dried leaves, for airflow. Then add kitchen scraps, a bit of old compost or soil, and continue layering until it's nearly full. Finally, cover it with a few inches of soil and mark the line with stones or mulch so you know where your nutrient channel runs. From there, you can simply drop new material into it every few weeks or months. The decomposition process will handle the rest. The nutrients will slowly seep sideways and upward into the root zone, creating a natural feeding gradient that requires no mixing, no turning, and no synthetic fertilizer. Over time, this buried line becomes a thriving ecosystem. Earthworms tunnel through it, microbes flourish, and plant roots naturally gravitate toward it. That's why it's called the lazy root feeder. It doesn't ask you to do anything beyond feeding it scraps. The wartime principle of feed the soil, not the plant, still holds true. When gardeners in the 1940s used this method, they didn't think in scientific terms like microbial biomass or carbon-nitrogen ratios. They just observed that their soil stayed productive, even when no new fertilizer was added. What they had unknowingly created was a closed-loop nutrient system, a primitive yet perfect form of soil regeneration. Today, that same principle applies. When you feed the soil's biology, not the plant directly, the ecosystem becomes self-regulating. The microbes break down material at the pace roots can use it. Nothing burns, nothing floods, and nothing is wasted. It's a self-correcting system that can run indefinitely with minimal input. You can even enhance it with modern tweaks. For instance, some gardeners drop in biochar to trap nutrients longer or add crushed charcoal at the bottom to improve aeration. Others insert perforated clay pipes to act as slow-release feeders for years. These small improvements keep the WWII spirit alive while blending it with modern understanding. The real results. They truly show the lazy root feeder's long-term power. In gardens where this method has been revived, the changes are, well, quite striking. Soil that was once hard and pale transforms into something dark and friable. You see, plants require less watering because the organic matter retains moisture just like a sponge. Fertilizer expenses, they drop to nearly zero, and weed pressure, well, it decreases as soil health balances itself. It's quite remarkable, really. Even gardeners in poor or sandy soils, they report dramatic improvements within just a single season. You see, because the feeding happens underground, it's immune to surface runoff and drought. Isn't that fascinating? Whether you're in a small urban bed or a large rural plot, the principle scales perfectly. It's as effective for a tomato plant as it is for a food forest. The lazy root feeder also doubles as a composting solution. Instead of maintaining a separate compost pile, you can integrate decomposition directly into your garden's root zones. Every peel or leftover you bury becomes next season's plant food. Over time, the garden literally eats its own waste and grows stronger from it. This old trick proves that simplicity always wins in the garden. When we look back at wartime innovation, it's easy to admire the creativity that came from scarcity. But the lazy root feeder stands out because it didn't just solve a temporary problem. It revealed a timeless truth about soil. It doesn't need our constant intervention, just smart direction. By placing nutrients where they belong, below the surface, you build a garden that sustains itself naturally. Every inch of buried organic matter becomes part of a living system that keeps feeding, cycling and growing long after you've forgotten about it. If you want your garden to become truly independent, start your own lazy root feeder today. Let it turn scraps into strength and soil into resilience. And if you found this guide valuable, subscribe to Hydrohaven for more tested historical growing methods that still outperform modern shortcuts. Share this video with fellow gardeners who respect the old ways, because the knowledge that kept our grandparents fed can still keep our gardens thriving today.